Welcome, everybody. We are glad you are here. And I see Kay over there, and there's Blake. I'm really glad you're here too. I'd hate to be here by myself. I'd come up with something to talk about, but I don't know what it would be.
No doubt you would, Kevin.
Hey, thank you for joining us today. I was holding off starting things for just a couple of minutes because, Blake, I don't know if you know this, but district superintendents are sometimes busy people, and they jump in right at the last moment.
Right at the last minute, you bet. One Zoom to the next.
Right at the last. Well, they're still jumping in right now. So we've got about half our crowd right now. I'm sure the rest of them will pop up in a minute. Hey, I'm Kevin Slip. My day job is publisher at Market Square Books. That's why you had to watch all that stuff flying across your screen about books and webinars and all those things a little while ago. But it's going to be a great day today. As you know, we've got Kay Cotan and Blake Bradford with us. Let me brag on them just a little bit. Your book, Mission Possible, what's it been, 2 years? More than 2 years since the second version came out? Still sells like crazy. Still sells like crazy. And I haven't looked at the numbers, but it had to be one of the top 2 or 3 books last year in the Methodist genre. And it's just still selling as good as ever. So very excited about that. Kay, you have a new book out. Why don't you tell them, take a second while people are still hopping in and tell them about your new book.
Sure. It says out like 2 weeks, I guess now. It's calling it Being the Church in the Post-Pandemic World. There's 2 parts to it. We put in a bonus section about the ultimate relaunch playbook. So it helps churches think about relaunching instead of just reopening. And then the meat of the book are kind of the adaptive, deep leadership shifts that we need to be thinking about to be vital and competent in this post-pandemic world, because it is a different world now. So
it is. Yeah. You know, that book hit #1 for a while last week.
It did.
And I'm sure it will be #1 again before this week is over. Those books just moved back and forth. Hers has been either #1 or #2 for the last week or so. I saw that Mission Possible was, I still think, #6 in the Methodist genre today. So amazing, just amazing. Well, we're really excited. I'm so excited to work with you on that book, and that is the great thing. I think that's going to be the big book in Methodist circles for the next few weeks, anyway, if not longer. We've got a group of district superintendents with us today. Just about 80 of them signed up for it, and already about almost 50 of them are here. They're still hopping in right now. You're going to talk to them about, it's related to your book, Mission Possible, right? Some of the things we're going to talk about today.
Kind of next steps and the next horizon that we're looking at, expanding the vision that we have from local churches to larger structures.
You all have been working quite a bit. I can't remember. I think I was texting either you or Kay late one night the other day, and the other person said, hey, you know, I think it was Kay, and she said, Blake and I are working on this thing right now. I'll talk to you later.
Exactly.
She works on my schedule. I was up at 4 o'clock this morning. I hadn't gone to bed yet working on things, so we know how that goes. Well, listen, I'm going to, Blake, I believe you're going to run the show today in terms of the slideshow, so I'm going to hit my magic button here, and if everything goes well, you'll see a button on your screen just about now, and you all are going to talk to us about some of the things related to this possible mission.
There we go, and I think we see it on the screen now. Yes, we're looking at a simplified district level governance. And many of you, I believe, know all about the fact that we've been teaching, consulting, guiding congregations, writing materials and resources for churches, local churches, to shift from the committee structures that we've inherited that haven't proven as useful in today's world into a simplified, accountable structure. The question always came up then, Kay, what about our other structures? What about our adjudicatory bodies? And
absolutely, yeah.
You bet. And we found a passage in the discipline, 661, that it, you know, Kay, we love 247.2, don't we?
We do.
But
flexibility, love it. Workarounds, love it.
Yeah, it gives some flexibility to us. And 661 gives the same thing to districts. And so each district of an annual conference may organize to develop, administer, and evaluate the missional life, advocacy needs, and ministries of the church in and through the district. Well, golly, with the may organize gives us an ability to be creative. And that's what today's session is primarily about, along with looking at some conference what does SAS, Simplified Accountable Structure, at the conference level. And then we're going to close out with some tools, particularly for district superintendents. As you know, as me, I'm a superintendent here in Arkansas. You know, I get questions all the time. Well, golly, I have a church asking me about this. What do I need to ask? What do I need to look for? So my DS colleagues, we have some tools for you to help you out.
Absolutely. Those common questions that are coming about that local church simplified accountable structure that we just wanted to share so that you have those tools available for you. So we're going to take 3 different views at simplified accountable structure, but we're going to start with the district because, of course, you're all district superintendents. Now, what Blake and I started with were of course, you want to dive right in, and of course we did that, but then we had to kind of retract and say, you know what, each kind of conference, and then sometimes each district within that conference may have a little bit different approach to what the function of their particular district is. So given that, I think it's helpful to maybe process these questions maybe with your leadership team at your district level. So what is the purpose? Having served in 3 different conferences, I can tell you that they were all different in the way that they organized and the way that the districts functioned. So because of that, just like every local church's context is different, I think we have to look through that lens for each of the districts. So what is your purpose? What do you serve? And how do you utilize the particular boards at your district level? Has to be, you know, what's your mission vision piece has to be the driver, just like everything else related to simplified accountable structure. And then what authority and responsibility do you have as it aligns in particular to your annual conference? And then what are the expectations of your annual conference in your role as a DS, and what is the role of the district lay leader? I mean, that has a wide variety of applications I have found. And then how does you as the DS or the chief mission strategist, if you have a conference developer, what does that look like, and how does that interact with your districts, or does it? I mean, is that done at a district level, or is that done at a conference level and exclusively, or is there some sort of collaboration? And we're running it up against this too. Is your district separately incorporated? So is it its own corporation, or are you like an entity of the annual conference? Because that makes a difference in a lot of pieces that go along with, in particular, the trustees portion of it. And then, do you own any property, like your district office, a parsonage? Sometimes there's even other maybe churches that have closed or something that are owned. And then, do you actually have employees that are employed and paid by the district, or do you have more of a conference approach and your district personnel are paid from the conference? And then the same with bookkeeping. Do you have individual bookkeeping at your district level, or is that at the conference office? And so depending on how you answer those questions will help you align kind of these next pieces to the puzzle. But first start with the questions, and the number 1 question is, what's the mission and vision of the district?
And I really appreciate all these questions, Kay, because I've realized talking to my colleagues, other superintendents in different settings, golly, we all use our structures completely different. Most churches I go into, I know pretty much what a board is and how it works and what its functions and roles are. They may operate and structure differently, but districts are all over the map. And so I'm glad we're taking, you know, the beginning of this conversation is taking approaches like, let's look at the context first.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly. And then we know even within one conference, different districts don't always run the same too. So you have to keep that
right. Shocking, but true. Yes.
Yes.
So the next piece is from me, and I want to show you something that this is like, show your work on the board time in school when they had the teacher had a math problem up and you're supposed to go up and write the math problem in front of everybody. This is the first attempt I had at trying to do a district administrative structure, okay? And I'm going to tell on myself now, okay? And this is like, let's not spread it around, but here's how I entered this process. I was working in the conference office. I was primarily a consultant with our Center for Vitality then, and I had been announced and projected to be a new district superintendent. And I'll admit something. I'd served on Board of Ordering Ministry for a dozen years. I'd been on other conference committees. I'd served on DCOM. I'd done that. That's the only district committee I'd ever served on, except a 6-month stint on a superintendency committee about 10 years prior. And that was my only experience with district committees. Well, I thought I still knew things because I'd been on conference staff and I knew about search structures and all that. So I said, oh, when we're restructuring, I can help with that. And I quickly thumbed through the discipline and just sort of, oh, there's the 600 pages. Oh, golly, there's a lot of committees here. And I scribbled up stuff on a board as fast as I could. And this is kind of the first attempt at trying to do a simplify, because we were existing in a system where many of our districts, they were all organized a little differently. Many of our districts had a superintendency committee, a nominations, a finance, a trustees, a district board, church location and building, a DCOM. Several of them had a missions committee that was in charge of a separate missions grant. And some of those districts, those mission committees were incorporated separately from the district, which is separately incorporated. It was all over the map. And then we also had this idea because a lot of our friends were having these district strategy teams, and I'd heard about that. And well, all the cool people are doing it. We need to do it too. And so we had this district strategy team. So we were looking at a bunch of structures, and frankly, I don't think we had enough clergy or interested laity to cover all these spots. Plus, it was a lot of overlap and a lot of confusion. So we tried simplification, and this was my first attempt. And so we had a DLT with superintendency and nominations and finance, a DCOM for ordination, the district board of church location building that we said, that's in the 2500s with the trustees. It must be about property. So I just sort of stuck those two together, and I didn't learn how big of a mistake that was, okay? And then we had the district strategy team, and again, all the cool people were doing it, so we ought to do that too. And here we are. And so it was okay. And I have to say, I'd much rather have this structure than 15 different committees that weren't quite sure what they were doing and overlap. But there were problems popping up in this first attempt I had. One is I should have paid more attention to purpose and the why. And just because things are next to each other in discipline doesn't mean they're particularly connected. And so I said, let's go back to the source material, and y'all check out this. Kay and I worked a chart listing all the district committees in the discipline, all the member restrictions, the terms of office. Kay, we had all these categories here, trying to figure out the purpose. Oddly enough, we found in the discipline there were some references to committees in here that were never referenced ever again in the discipline. In other words, I think there were leftover vestiges like an appendix or something or gallbladder. I don't know what they were supposed to do, but I think there were some editing issues. So we found some stuff like that, but we reorganized it all, and we came up with a different kind of plan that was more based on function, accountability, and true simplification. And so I'm going to give y'all a snapshot of what that can look like. And so we have 3 different boards in this structure for the governance part. Now, okay, we always say governance is different than ministry. So like your lay servant ministries, that's a ministry team,
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You may have a disaster response team. That's great. That's a ministry team. That doesn't mean they have to have all these things built into the governance system, because it's a ministry team. And that doesn't mean those folks have to be elected all the time. They can be selected out of their passions and gifts for ministry. But with 3 different governing boards, one's a district leadership board, the next is the district board of church location and building, and the third is a district committee on ministry. And our image is we can operate governance with these three boards. And if you notice, the very first thing we had is what is everyone's role. So, okay, you want to kind of share on that real quick on each of these roles real quick, and we'll come back around to some of the next pieces.
So I just have to put you on the spot because just these folks are going to love this. What did you call the district board? Church?
Oh, well, okay. I learned this from one of my friends, and I've been told this. I don't need to do it anymore, but the district board of church location and building, the closest acronym I could come up with is DEBACLE. So, yeah.
And in some cases, that's appropriate. So, yeah.
That's what I've done a building project more than once. I've always felt like they were debacles.
Exactly. Yeah. I just didn't think we could get by without you having to share that piece there. Yeah. So what we were looking at is to see, okay, so what is their true role in each of these 3? Because I think, just like at the local church level, like, we talk about the different lanes of ministry. And so often our councils are trying to drive in the management lane, and ministry is trying to drive in management, and therefore the governance lane is completely abandoned, right? And then we don't have anybody left over to actually do the ministry. And so we felt like that model really does clarify the roles. And so we wanted to look at it through that lens. And so we see the district leadership board, their role is truly governance. That is the where are we going, how are we holding ourselves accountable to our true purpose, and how are we leveraging assets for that mission and vision. And the DEBACLE team, they're more about strategy. So that's the how. So if this is where the leadership team has discerned that we're headed, then what are the strategies that need to be in place and how to do that? And then the DCOM is the leadership development arm of this particular model.
Thank you. Yes. So, the district leadership board would then have 1-year terms. It would fulfill the disciplinary requirements of a district council and superintendency. And guess what? Trustees. I had to become a DS to find out that trustees in the district board, church location and building, they're both in the 2500s, but they really have nothing to do with each other. There's no overlap really in roles. It's really, the district trustees are a governance job. They need to be in the governing team, the district leadership board. If you have an endowment or mission board, it's time to close that out and incorporate that into the single governing board. Now, nominations. We talk a lot in local churches. Nominations always has to be a separate committee, and that is totally true. That's my interpretation. I believe all of us have looked at that. District committee actually does not have that requirement. So you can keep a nominations committee as part of that and also do all the finances. And that district leadership board can relate to different ministry teams in different ways and that feel comfortable and appropriate for your context, which that means you can invite them in occasionally as guests. You could just relate in other ways to the superintendent. You can be creative in how you want to approach that with ministry teams. But notice that is a lot of different responsibilities in one board, but I think it covers all that governing work. Now, as you said, the strategy work of the district board of church location and building. Now, one of my friends the other day, they use Dub Club. That's probably better than DEBACLE. I think I'll go with Dub Club. So the Dub Club, now, if you notice in this one, it has a 3-year term, 3-year classes. So it's easier just going and split that off, have 3-year classes. They're looking at building land proposals, closing churches, new starts, church property in the district. Notice that's, again, outward focused. If local churches are the primary place that new disciples are made, that means this committee here, this board, is working to create new places for new people, maybe handle grant work with Fresh Expressions if you wanted to do that. This group would also be the group that if you have a congregational developer in the conference office or the district office, this would be the primarily group they would operate with at that district level. And for instance, I'm using my district board church location building as we have a strategy team trying to merge all that strategic work together. But if we have some certain grants that we're doing with trying to figure out and grow new disciples in new places, that's the group, because they do with property. So it's actually a strategy team that has disciplinary authority, which is what I was excited to see and kind of merge that responsibility together. The last piece is the DCOM. It really doesn't change in this structure. They're of course elected at the annual conference, not the district level. And I've tried, Kay and I talked about, I cannot figure out a good way to put that anywhere else but leave it be as its own separate entity and let it do its work of building the next generation of clergy leadership and keeping oversight of local pastors. So that's the approach we're looking at there. Now, when we design this, you'll notice we have a big kind of circle there around the Dove Club, the District Board Church Location Building, and the District Leadership Board. Kay, we were talking, we can put those together. It's a little extra challenging. You got to watch the term limits and all that. Yep. But if you wanted to, there's no reason you can't put it together. You would just need to keep an eye on all those contextual questions and make sure that your team here that is coming from all these different churches, lay and clergy, you have the correct balance and they have the bandwidth for this kind of work.
Right. And they truly understand the two different lanes and the two purposes that they're serving, as opposed to always being in strategy and not in governance or vice versa. Yep. Sure. Absolutely.
So now putting that group together, we have a district leadership board composition. The other is pretty easy to figure out. Here's the composition that we figured out for, which took a little bit of work to figure out, to keep it disciplinary. And so you have a district lay leader for your term. Then you have right here, this 2 lay women, 2 lay men, 2 clergy. They're the ones that are the trustees. So when you have, if you're separately incorporated, for instance, and you have to file with Secretary of State, I would only put this group right here as trustees. That keeps it a little bit cleaner. 2 at-large members, you have a finance steward or treasurer, whatever you want to call that role. A district ministry team and group liaison could be another role you might want to invent for this, and that person could keep connection along with the superintendent to all those different ministry teams that you have floating around. Your district youth group, your district disaster response, lay speaking ministry. So someone is a group liaison, so they have one person, one point of contact. 2 folks selected by the superintendent, and any advisory members as needed that are non-voting, you can add that in. Now, these are all single-year terms except for the lay leader, except if you decide to do, I'm going to go backwards in my slides. If you want to put these 2 together, that's what the stuff in red is, to include let's use Dove Club, because I'm going to be nice now. Use the Dove Club folks. You can fit those folks in with their 3-year terms and double up those 2 teams. So that's a way to pull it off with 2 if you want to add the red stuff in red ink. Otherwise, that's your district leadership board, and you can imagine how that simple system, that easily accountable system, the clarity of purpose, all that works together to fulfilling a better governing system for your district with clear accountability, clear responsibility, and also, well, let's just be honest, a lot more efficiency in our system.
Yeah. And don't we love efficiency? I think that's what we're all trying to get to, efficiency and accountability. And I think that serves that purpose for sure. Absolutely. Yep. So we're now going to just take a quick peek into what we're calling our next horizon, if you will. So we're talking about simplified accountable structure at the local church level. We've had a lot of interest in what does it look like at the district level. And we're having conversations with, so what would this look like at the conference level? So we're putting out what could be possible, how to start conversations, how could we simplify at the conference level. So again, we went back to our book of discipline, and paragraph 610 even uses the word flexibility to design the structure. So that's exactly what we did, is we wanted to look at what is the flexibility in putting that conference structure together, especially so that we can simplify and then accountability. How does that look in a particular model? Now, I did not have the pretty spreadsheet that Blake did. I mean, mine looks more like this when I was working on it, as I was pulling everything out of the book of discipline and beginning to jot some notes. But the same process we went through on this particular model. And I'm just going to say that there has been no conference that has chosen to be a guinea pig yet. So this is a theory conversation as opposed to it's up and working and can be endorsed, if that makes sense. So let's
yeah, it really is the beginning of a conversation that I think we all need to start having about our conference structures. You know, what is our purpose and what's our goals here?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So this is simplified down to 7 kind of areas of leadership. I'm sorry, this is 8 because this is before the first merger. But so think about congregational development, bottom left-hand corner, and you'll see that in each of these entities, the book of discipline that they are responsible for is noted there. So all of the conference book of discipline paragraphs are covered in these teams as placed forward. You can see that there is the DCOM piece there, district superintendency and so on, which is a part of that simplified structure. So you really wouldn't even have to count that one in your conference simplified structure. But the bishop holds the pieces around administrative review and committee on investigation. The conference lay leader, and that position, of course, takes care of all the laity pieces. Administrative services is around pensions, equitable comp, and clergy leave. And then you have connectional ministries, which was UMM, UMW, communications, archives, and so on. And then you have the leadership development, which is your Board of Ordained Ministry piece. Now, you'll see in the center is Jesus, right? We're leading everybody to Jesus. And surrounding Jesus in the most accountable part of the structure is what we're calling your conference leadership team. And the conference leadership team has the responsibilities of the 611, 637, 8, 40, and 7.3. So what we're doing is you're consolidating into like-sized ministries, and you can be looking at the different pieces and prioritizing based on mission and vision of the conference, right? It starts with mission and vision once again, and then how do we align with those? So let's go to the next one, Blake, if you don't mind. Now, that's a lot of paragraphs to have to look at to figure out what this whole mix of people looks like. So the conference lay leader would be in collaboration with the bishop, of course. The lowest number that we could come up with that makes this possible is 12 people on the leadership team, a third lay women, a third lay men, a third clergy, and 1/5 appointed by the bishop. And Blake even said, what is that about? Well, that's part of the episcopacy requirement.
I made you tell me which paragraph. I had to look that one up myself.
I did. We've held each other accountable and tried to get through this work, did we not? That's for sure. And then because of the requirements of all those other paragraphs, here's all the other inclusions that you want to consider for that particular team. But that particular team is kind of, think of it, you know, kind of like the leadership board of of a local church. This is the leadership board of your conference that has that governance kind of a viewpoint, because so often we all are down in the weeds, and who's really doing that overarching piece that is so important. And then we said, okay, could we take it any smaller? And of course, we found out another way to do that. And this is really the way some conferences are going or have gone. And that is taking this model, takes the separate leadership and congregational development and puts those under the connectional ministries piece. So then you're down to the district piece, and then the four kind of overarching teams, if you will, and then the fifth being the leadership team in the middle. So imagine a conference with 5 leadership teams, 5 committees, 5 teams, one of those being the leadership team, and 4 of them actually out there representing ministry and having strategy around the mission and vision that have been cast by the leadership team. I mean, that just gets me kind of excited to think about, because we have so many clergy that say, and laity too, that just say, I spend all my time in meetings. I don't have time to actually do ministry. And just like at the other levels, this releases more people into actually doing the ministry. And that's what we're about, right?
You
Absolutely.
bet.
Yeah. So again, this is just some seeds to be planting and to be thinking about around simplified structure at the conference level. And there's a part of me that when you're out talking at local churches about simplified accountable structure, and then you've got these conferences, that maybe aren't simplified accountable structure. It feels like being a hypocrite. So I just think that this is some really great work that we could be looking at and really be more efficient.
Thank you, Kay. And so that is the next horizon. I mean, but the district piece, we get asked that every time we're meeting with folks. And so that began that conversation and kind of moved toward, and several of us have done experiments in that. This next piece, people are going to be asking, that's going to be next. But you're right, we're a lot better at creating new committees than we ever are discontinuing them, aren't we?
Absolutely, no question, no question.
So we do have some bonus content. In addition, we promise to talk about the district structure, and that's the main entree, and then also the conference. But Kay, I know that my fellow superintendents and I, when we get calls from local churches and we're trying to figure out how to handle questions about simplified structure, and folks are wanting to explore it. Now, if I'm lucky, I get a call. Usually what happens is I get a charge conference document with a brand new structure, and that structure, there may be an email or something attached. Oh, by the way, can we do this new structure?
Yeah.
And so we have some recommendations and some tools for our superintendents, don't we?
Absolutely. And these are based on really our most frequent questions, or some of the things that I would call our latest learnings and recommendations based on some of the potholes that local churches and DSs are experiencing in this model. So the very first one that we wanted to share with you was around, there are really 2 main touch points for a district superintendent when churches are moving to their simplified accountable structure. It is our recommendation, again, we shared with you last time we gathered, that there are 3 really distinct phases in moving into simplified accountable structure. The discernment phase, which is really the praying and the sharing of information, discerning, is this the right model at the right time for our congregation, which we haven't done a great job in a lot of churches, which we have now understand the importance of doing that. That gives you that trust and integrity in the process on down the road. And then the equipping piece, and then the implementing piece. So the very first touch point, our recommendation for churches is, once that they have an inkling that they want to explore, not that they want to go to it, right? Like, they want to explore this model, is we're sending them to you as the district superintendent to say, we would like permission to explore the simplified accountable structure. And we're recommending this because too often they get way down the road, and then a district superintendent has to say no for a variety of reasons, right? That maybe they didn't know a change of appointment was coming, or there is some underlying conflict that is going to keep this from being healthy that the DS is aware of. So we're asking them to come to you as district superintendents to say, we want to explore this. Do we have your permission to do so? Right. Yeah. So that's the first touch point.
Right. And Kay, I tell you what, I'm going to go to the next slide. We can talk about that initial, and then I'll come back and let's do that. Let's do the second touch point. So on this first touch point, this initial consultation, I know this is small print, but there's some things we say you need to ask first. We need your why. We need your who. In other words, who's involved. We need to hear your which. In other words, which committees are you wanting to include, and your when. In other words, your timeline. And so those are the main categories. And there's some things that I always look for. One of them is if the why is, golly, we just want less meetings and there's really nothing about the mission of the church. That kind of sets off a bell for me. The other piece is when we get to the who, if I'm just hearing the pastor and nobody else, I don't really say yes. In fact, I say, give me your lay leader involved on this and maybe a few others, then we'll talk. The which committees, I'm not going to hold anyone to that, but I like to kind of know where they're heading. And if it's the main structure, just unpack a little bit. And on the timeline, if it's, oh, we're planning this next week, that tells me they're not really serious about discernment. So those are some of the things to ask. But I think you mentioned earlier, there may be some times to hit the brakes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of those I already talked about, there could be a potential clergy appointment change that the local church and the pastor aren't aware of yet. Maybe this particular pastor is not necessarily gifted in discernment processes. Also, sometimes we have a pastor who may or may not have a correct interpretation of the simplified accountable structure, and if wanting to bring that with them. And so the congregation almost gets to the point of saying, oh, we have to change our structure every time we have a new pastor, instead of the congregation owning that structure and understanding and working within that structure. And the other thing, Blake, that I have, it took me a while to figure this piece out, but typically when they the local church wants to hold out trustees or hold out finance, there's an underlying reason for that. And that underlying reason of conflict control, I mean, we could have a whole mixture of reasons of why that is. There is some unhealthiness there. And it really is better to clear up that unhealthiness first, and then move really into the simplified structure as recommended. What we find is when you pull one out, and they'll say, oh, well, we're going to slowly go into that. Well, guess what? They never get into that, right? Because it stayed out because of an unhealthy reason to begin with.
It becomes turf battles and such. One of my go-to statements is, don't try to use simplified structure. Don't try to use the discipline to solve what's really a Matthew 18 problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's just some Jesus-centered conversations that need to be had with some folks. And so trying to use these tools isn't fair to the tool. It's not fair to the mission. And it's not really fair to the relationships we need to have with our fellow church members. And if there's an issue like, well, we can't get the trustee in because the chair's been the chair for 30 years, maybe you just need to have that conversation and talk about turf and talk about the future. Then out of seeking that health, you move towards simplified structure. So it may delay your discernment process. But, that's okay, because Kay's right. We'll never really move into true accountable structure. You may simplify, but it won't be accountable because you're holding things out for the wrong reasons.
And in your example, Blake, when we're not willing to have those difficult Matthew 18 kind of conversations, we're not going to be able to practice accountable leadership. So we're not ready to move into the model, right? They go hand in hand, right? And we're also finding there may be a conference-wide kind of approach to simplified accountable structure. And so that shared terminology and training and equipping might be coming along that the local church isn't aware of, because we're finding more and more how important that is, right, Blake, around having common understanding, language, implementation, because when each DS has their own interpretation of what it looks like, and you have pastors or laity speaking across district lines, let alone clergy being appointed in different districts, and there's a different interpretation. It's just very confusing, and it's not necessarily helpful. So a conference approach is what we're finding is the most helpful piece.
It really is. And I can understand. I talked to another superintendent. They were talking about, oh man, we're like 2 months away from our big release, and this church really wants to move now. And I said, well, maybe they could be a pilot group, but maybe they could just wait a little bit. But let's get them on board to having shared terminology. I've seen this with churches that a pastor's moved, a new pastor goes in. There's not really a shared conference understanding. That pastor goes in and says, "What are we doing here?" And the leaders, because there's not this ongoing terminology, not a good discernment process, they went, "The pastor brought it. I don't really."
Right.
And the phrase they used, and we wrote this in the book, is, "I felt like we got a sports car of a structure, but none of us know how to drive stick." That's and right. So that shared terminology will help all these transitions happen. Yeah. So let me go back to that original. That was that initial consultation. And then, of course, there's an approval process. And that is consult. The DS should consult. If you're doing a coaching system that we're really encouraging nowadays with simplified accountable structure coaches, they're certified, and Kay can say more about that sometime. Work with that coach, work with the board, just make sure we're all on the same page, get a copy of the resolution. We do have sample resolutions now to make it easier. So folks aren't just creating stuff haphazardly. We now encourage you can use that sample resolution and adapt it. And then convene not a charge conference, but a church conference to consider the change to an SAS structure. Kay, church conference means everyone gets a vote, right?
You bet, you bet. And that's very intentional, because going back to one of the pump the brake moments, if it's only the pastor and a couple of lay people who went to a workshop, got all fired up, and it goes to a charge conference, it's those that are, those 2 or 3 that are going to vote it in. And then all of a sudden the church was, what the heck happened? And so again, this is this first year when they're voting it in, and it's a 2-step process too. Once you have approved them moving to the structure, then the church conference, so everyone is speaking into it. Again, transparency, communication. We're trying to do a really good job of laying that groundwork to begin with. And you're voting the structure in, not the leaders, right? Just the structure. Then that gives the coach the opportunity to go in and work with the nominations team, because there's not only a shift in leadership at the board level, but there's a shift in leadership in nominations as well. So we want, number one, not for it to feel like it's a done deal. Here's the structure and the people, just say yes, and we're going to get on with what we want to do, versus it's seen as a logical progression of the process, and then go into the nominations process with the SAS coach, helping to train the nominations. Then they put forth their recommendations, and then again, if this is in the flow of a year, and we have it timed with our coaches of how it can work within the normal rhythm of a charge conference, that then it can go to a charge conference for the leadership approval. But that could also be a church conference. That some want that first one to be a church conference for the leadership too. Then it can go back to its regular way. But in this first year, just to build trust and transparency, we're finding that this is a best practice.
Right. We don't want all these committee folks to find out they suddenly don't have a job by an email later. Hey, we had a charge conference, and so to have everyone have that vote, you're kind of voting not to vote a little bit. You know, you're voting to put responsibility on a different kind of team. And then, of course, that separate charge conference, you can just do the normal, the normal fall charge conference. Hey, here's our new officers begin January 1. You'll notice that it's now a half a page nominations page instead of a 10-page booklet. But here you are. Now, I have to admit, early in my superintendency, I put those together, and it just didn't feel right. Here we are voting in a new structure. They already had the list. The list was made up of a lot of the discernment team. I thought, I don't want to do this like this again. You kind of learn when you do stuff, and it just didn't feel as good as it needed to. But it was all okay in that situation. But I making an effort now. This is the better practice here. Now, the other question we get a lot of is, I know this is small print. It's simplified accountable structure and the micro church. And I understand, and a lot of folks, they look at the system and go, man, we're a really small church. This is really all we can field anyway. So as superintendent, here's what I'll say about this. I've got a lot of churches that are very small. It's Arkansas, got a lot of rural Arkansas churches, and some of them will move to simplicity in their structures. They don't always going to move to accountability. And we may do simplicity just because that's the number of people involved. But I'm not feeling too good about the fact that we have a coaching system. We have these very clear structure for a clear SAS process. And this, some of our micro churches, I feel like, they're kind of wanting to go around the system and such. And it really kind of took us to a place where we go, simplicity, fine, we can have that conversation, but it's not really simplified accountable structure, is it?
Nope.
Maybe there's some other things we need to think about here.
Exactly.
What are some of the questions you've been asking superintendents, you've been asking churches, you've been pushing with different buttons than let's go immediately to simplified accountable structure, haven't you?
I have. The first one is the workaround. It's like, we're a small church. We can't get 9 unrelated people. And my first question then is, well, if you can't do it in simplified structure, you certainly haven't been doing it in traditional, right? So that's not the answer. And then secondly, I think this is our opportunity to say, okay, simplified accountable structure is the new hammer. And so every church looks like a nail kind of thing, because we tend to do that in the United Methodist Church. But to say, okay, what's really going on? Is this really about a desire to simplify so that we're more efficient? Or is this really about another conversation that needs to be had instead of? And most of the time is, are we a much more complicated entity as a nonprofit corporation than we need to be for who we are? Should we be really thinking about a house church, or should we be thinking about classes or bands or other possibilities? Do we need to send them through something like Choosing the Faithful Path or Small Church Checkup to help them understand where they're at and where they're going? I think the only reason that we put simplification in a church without accountability is they have named, we are so far down in the life cycle, and we don't have any intention of revitalization. And so we're just going to ride it out, right? Because if we don't have accountability in a church, that means, okay, we're just going to exist for ourselves. We're not necessarily missionally driven, which is what a church exists for, right? So I just think when you have a micro church, that it's just, let's just pause and maybe ask some of these other questions, because I think it leads us to different answers than, oh yeah, let's just simplify.
You bet. Now, we have a list here, and now paragraph 213, oh man, that's one of my favorites. I've used that process before. I have awareness, and there's a very clear process in paragraph 213.
Yep.
I have to admit, Kay, when we were talking about some of this, you pulled out sections of discipline. I had to look up on this one. There's a lot more. I mean, local church potential 213, yeah, There's several others here.
There are. You know, I used to be told that if somebody ever walked down a hallway and saw me with my book of discipline open, it's like, holy crap, we got a developer with their book of discipline. What are you going to try to work around these days? But to me, this speaks to the accountability, you know, of what we are. And we have always steered away from accountability in the church. And the further we get away from it, I think the more it speaks into our situation. And so I think as we're asking our local churches and simplified accountable structure to be more accountable, I think there's plenty of opportunity that the book of discipline, it's been in there since the beginning, some of them, that we need to be looking at, because they're in there for a purpose, and that is for that accountability. And there are processes that make more sense than just put them in simplified structure. I mean, we love simplified structure, don't get us wrong, but it's not the answer to everything.
So we superintendents, we can do a deliberate analysis of transitional communities, that's 212, call of ministry of all the baptized or people living up to our baptismal vows, 220, strategic deployment of clergy and realignment of charges in 419.9, financial accountability inquiry. That's the one I frankly had to look up and go, that's in there? It sure is.
It sure is.
Membership accountability inquiry. I mean, these are tools that are in the superintendent toolbox, and we don't have to depend just on simplified structure or even just on 213. We have a lot more tools in our toolbox than we ever imagined. Simplified accountable structure is a great one for helping us get re-geared toward mission, re-geared toward accountability. It's not going to fit in every circumstance, and we're okay with that.
Absolutely.
But we know that right off the bat, we've got to focus on mission accountability. Here's a lot of tools to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So those were two kind of main areas that we're just getting lots of questions around, especially as we are recommending that discernment piece now, which has made a tremendous difference, I have to say, in implementing. And one thing to add around that touch points from the district superintendent is we are training up simplified accountable structure coaches to be partners with the district superintendent. As district superintendent, you know that you are the approval for simplified accountable structure, but you cannot, you just don't have the time or the bandwidth to walk through every piece of this with the church. There's too many steps and you have too many churches. And so we're training up the certified SAS coaches to be your partner, your eyes, your ears, your equippers. So it started with that exploring request, and then dispatch your SAS coach out of your district. And then they're walking them through the discernment process. Then they're bringing you back that feedback so that you have a much more informed kind of decision around what's really the lay of the land and how healthy are they and ready to go. So I just wanted to offer that to you. More and more coaches and conferences and districts are getting those partnerships in alignment. Because the other thing that's coming up, Blake, is the pandemic kind of put a microscope on structure and flexibility. And so there's even a bigger push because they saw the inefficiency in SAS during the pandemic.
You bet.
Then,
a lot of churches have days to make difficult decisions, and most of our churches were not designed for that.
You bet. That's so true. That's so true. And just one other thing that I would mention before we go to questions here is we have had some requests to come and talk to cabinets about what does it look like for a conference-wide local church SAS. District superintendents have asked for conversations around the district piece as SAS as well. And of course, we're willing to share our research for conversation around the conference model as well. If that's helpful, we're both available for those conversations. So I think, Kevin, we're ready for questions if you happen to have any.
We do happen to have some questions. So if you have questions for Blake or Kay or both of them, just go ahead and send those to us and we will look at those right now. The first one is this, and it's a long question, so pay attention. You ready? Here we go. What percentage or number of leaders need to have buy-in to transition to a simplified accountability structure at the district or annual conference level? What do you anticipate the critical mass to be at the annual conference level to increase the potential of a healthy experience of moving to a new structure?
You want to take it or you want me to?
That's a multi-point question there. Okay.
That is a good question.
Let's unpack that one more time.
Do you want me to read it again?
Yeah.
You're good. Yeah. Okay. What percentage or number of leaders need to have buy-in to transition to a simplified accountability structure at the district or annual conference level? That's the first part.
Oh, I think you can pull that one off pretty easily. I think a few conversations here and there with some key folks. Here in Arkansas, we moved to our simplification within, it just took a couple of months. Most folks were not bought into a certain structure. We mainly needed to do good communication. And so it wasn't so much about numbers of leaders, it was about adequately communicating our purpose and the meaning of the structure, and being very clear how we're going to keep folks aware of what this team is doing. And so, so things like we try real hard to, send out our agenda, and we just had district conference, and I think we're sending out all the paperwork that was approved. Just let everyone know. Try to be transparent the best we can. But for buy-in now, again, there's context matters. If there's some power structures going on there may be to have some other conversations. I think start with those questions to ask about the complexity of your structure, work from there. The more complexity points there are, the longer the process is going to take. For instance, if you have a separately incorporated mission board, that's a one piece. If for us in the Arkansas conference, we moved all of our bookkeeping into the annual conference. When you start doing things like that, it makes this kind of roll into this system very easy.
So
sure,
always lead with the why, right? Why are we doing this? Not just what are we doing? Always lead with the why. Emphasize the accountability and how we're going to practice that, because that gives it the trust, is when the accountability piece. And then the third piece I would say is this needs to be handled somewhat like at the discernment process at a local church level, to say, what conversations are you having? What small groups do you need to have conversations? How do you share information about it, rather than just present it at annual conference and say, here it is, vote on it. And so it's going through all the proper steps, and communication, like Blake said, is key.
And conferences that have already a local church simplification, a lot of that work is pre-done, because that is already a terminology people pick up on, and they're saying, finally, you telling us it's good, now you're doing it. Wonderful.
Right. Exactly.
Someone wrote in and asked actually 2 or 3 people have written in and asked what the perfect size church is for this. If you were to pick what size church is this good for? What size church is this good for?
Oh, golly. We've seen every size. Oddly enough, it was some of our largest congregations in the denomination that picked up on it first. It was designed for smaller. That 247.2 was designed for smaller churches. Bigger churches are the first ones that picked up on it. That has to do with group theory and how people organize themselves, a little bit of that social engineering stuff. Boards over 9, 10, they become much less effective. Yeah. And folks in business know that. Other nonprofits are experiencing that. I have to say, I'll say this though. I think there's real magic that happens with the larger pastoral side. That place where you're at 125 or so. For me, I've seen churches that are, because that just has to do with critical mass issues and all that. I've seen that those churches are on the cusp of, are they moving into close, smaller, or family? Are they going to move up to program size using that kind of size theory conversations? It has an enormous impact in that size church. I think all churches are impacted by it, and I've seen it in Kay. I know you have too. You worked with all size congregations.
Absolutely.
I think the largest impact though has been at that. One pastor might be the only full-time employee on staff. they're able to, the pastor's able to use their time better, like leadership is. It meets some real critical mass issues. It's really remarkable what can happen in a church of that particular size, although I'm a big fan of it at all sizes if you do the work.
And I would say that especially the accountability piece, but sometimes it's the structure that's keeping a church from growing. The complication in the way we're making decisions is keeping a church from growing. So sometimes shifting to this simplified accountable structure kind of breaks that barrier of the actual growth in the church, which is magic happening too, it looks like. Yeah.
How many districts do you know that have done this for the district?
For that district structure? Okay, go ahead, Kay.
As there are varieties, just like there are local churches, there are varieties of this going on. This particular piece, we've had conversations with about, I'd say 5 different districts at this point who are moving to this. But to say there's a district in this particular model doing it yet, I'm not aware of any.
And piloting in different ways, things like that.
Yes.
Yeah, and so we have a lot of simplification happening. The question is, how effective has it been?
Correct.
That was one of the things I learned. I learned my lesson 3 years ago. You know, and I kind of showed you my math on that. And so I think the main thing is when you start looking back at purpose, because we've talked to a lot of superintendents about different permutations. We start going back to purpose, it starts becoming a lot clearer. What I think we get caught up in is imagining how things are now and trying to tweak it rather than looking back at real purpose and working out of that purpose.
Yep.
And so the tweak versions can be challenging. I've also been around the block long enough to know I've seen some structures that left me scratching my head going, yeah, I don't think those will hold up legally. So part of this is also trying to help superintendents, you know, do processes that still will fit in the discipline and will not get us in too much trouble.
That's right. Well, I would just say, you know, we're just thrilled that you all continue to be a support to simplified accountable structure. We appreciate your partnership in Mission Possible. I mean, we really are trying to be equippers and partners alongside you as well. And as a matter of fact, in the next edition of Mission Possible that's going to be out in just a couple of months, we have a whole section for adjudicatory leaders with additional resources. So we have you in mind all the time and trying to equip you as well as the local churches. Blake, what would you add?
Well, you covered exactly what I was going to say. We wrote in the next version of Mission Possible an extra 30 pages, I think, just for adjudicatory leaders. Fellow district superintendents, I know we need tools, and we're going to try to make those tools widely available to you, from conversation questions to ask churches to that sample resolution to all these other, you know, kind of tools as we're trying to share terminology, share resources. And also what we're finding, superintendents not using us, but just talking to each other after they've been taught how to use these tools and able to grow more opportunities in their local churches. So I hope we continue to resource and give tools to you all. You are our colleagues in ministry, our partners in ministry, and we are thrilled to serve.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great information, just great information. Thank you both for that. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Okay, Blake, anything else before we head out?
Many
Just
blessings.
Appreciate you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us. My name's Kevin Slimp. I'm publisher at Market Square Books. We helped sponsor this today, and we're really glad you were here. Thanks again, Kay. Blake, thank you, and we will catch you next time.